Hello and welcome to the LLG Grapevine podcast. You're listening to Deborah Evans, LLG's Chief Executive, and I'm joined this week by Dennis Hall, LLG Bulletin Editor.
Hello, everyone.
Now, as the Bulletin led last week, tributes continue to flood in for our past president, Suki Binjal. We've received many inquiries as to the arrangements, tributes and donations to honour Suki. We have, of course, been mindful of the sudden shock with which we all received the news and have been keen to ensure that any steps taken have the full approval of her husband, Paul. We have set up a dedicated email box to capture tributes to Suki and condolences to the family, which we will collate into a book. We would like to invite you to send these by email to sukibinjal.memorial@llg.org.uk. For those of you who wish to send cards or letters of condolence, please send these to Mr. Paul McMahon, care of Lawyers in Local Government, to our postal address in Horsham. Now, Dennis, we had the privilege of hosting the Ombudsman, Amardeep Somal, at our recent Monitoring Officers Conference, and I understand that a report has recently been published in respect of complaint handling.
Indeed, it has. The Local Government Ombudsman recently published their latest annual report on social care complaints. So let's have a look at the headlines in the report. The Local Government and Social Care Ombudsman upheld 80% of all adult social care cases it investigated in detail in 2023 to 24. In its annual review of adult social care complaints, the Ombudsman said that key areas of concern included delays in the assessment of people's needs and a failure to put people at the centre of the care they receive. The watchdog said poor communication with both clients and their families has also been an area of concern throughout the process, with particular issues around the information provided to service users and their families being unclear or overly complex. It added that 99% of organisations did comply with the remedies recommended to put things right. Over the past year, the Ombudsman received 2,982 complaints about adult care, with just 333 of those being from people who funded their own care. The Ombudsman revealed that the number of complaints about privately funded and arranged care had dropped by 15%, following a continued trend over the past few years. And the watchdog noted that this number was far lower than would have been expected given the sector's proportion of the care market, and called for signposting to its services to be made mandatory at the end of every provider's complaint process. Ombudsman Amardeep Somal said, "People have a right to bring their complaint about adult social care to us as the independent scrutineer. However, they don't always know they can do so, and independent care providers should be signposting them to us, just as councils do. Independent care providers will often have both private and council-funded clients, and there should be the same route to redress however people's care is funded." And she went on, "It is likely that low awareness of our role in privately funded and arranged care plays a part in creating this gap between the expectation and reality of the number of complaints we receive. Independent care providers are not required by law to signpost users to our service," she said, "and that's the position as it currently stands. But we know," she said, "that it happens sporadically." Deborah.
It's interesting, Dennis, because as the Ombudsman observed, when we think of adult social care, we tend to think of the more elderly individual. However, most of the complaints received actually centre on young adults requiring care. Now, we've heard a lot from the government on a whole range of issues they wish to address, but they're fairly silent in respect to adult social care. And indeed, it really wasn't covered in their manifesto. Much of it relates to funding, but not all. Turning to other news, the Law Gazette has reported alarming testimony from the Post Office inquiry by Ben Fote, who was General Counsel at the Post Office when Henry Staunton was the chair. Prior testimony from Mr. Staunton had, the Gazette reported, contained stinging criticism about Mr. Fote. Indeed, in an article published on the 3rd of October, the Gazette reported that in an email to the Chief Executive in December 2023, Staunton had written, I have never had a legal counsel in whose judgment I have so little faith. But a review of senior management suggested that Staunton subjected his senior lawyers to hostile conversations after he began an internal investigation into misconduct allegations. During Mr. Foat's testimony at the inquiry, the lawyer had to take a break as he seemed in distress. The evidence to the inquiry, and we will of course have to wait for the outcome, but it feeds into this question of ethics, which we have been discussing for a while now. In-house counsel is in many ways similar to the role of monitoring officer and the difficult position they can occupy when trying to uphold standards. I do need to say here for balance that following the television programme, which highlighted the post office scandal in January, Mr. Foat did write to senior managers that the media was reporting erroneous facts and that the post office should prepare a fact checker to explain that not all convictions were unsafe. This led to Mr. Staunton declaring that lawyers were continuing to defend the indefensible. There has also been reported from one former postmaster in respect of a compensation claim that the post office's lawyers had demonstrated brutality and lack of trust in the process of recovering compensation. So there is much for the inquiry to get to the bottom of, but there's no doubt that the television programme, Mr. Bates, did much to propel this scandal forward to where we are today. Now, from television to radio, and the importance of compliance with the broadcasting code during elections. Dennis.
Well, yes, exactly, Deborah. A recent news report has demonstrated the role of Ofcom's code of practice in relation to elections when radio station LBC breached the broadcasting code in its coverage of the London mayor election. Here's the detail on this. Radio station LBC breached Ofcom rules in its coverage of last May's London mayoral election, the regulator has found, and the station blamed human error. This issue arose after a debate between the four leading candidates, chaired by presenter Tom Swarbrick, who failed at its end to include a full list of other candidates or say this could be found on the station's website. Now, Ofcom said LBC had been entitled to include only the four leading candidates on the basis of polling and previous support, who were Sadiq Khan, Susan Hall, Rob Blackie and Zoe Garbett. It had earlier interviewed Reform candidate Howard Cox and Natalie Campbell, the only independent to attract any significant support. Ofcom said none of these programmes provided a full list of all candidates and raised issues under the section of its code that states, any constituency or electoral area report or discussion after the close of nominations must include a list of all candidates standing at the election, giving first names, surnames and the name of the party they represent, or, if they are standing independently, the fact that they are an independent candidate. LBC said a full list of candidates was available, in fact, on its website, and this was referenced across LBC's schedule at regular intervals throughout the election period in news bulletins and in programming. The company said it had intended to mention the full list after the four-way debate, but this was omitted due to human error and the pressure of a heated debate within a live broadcast environment. Deborah.
Now, I understand LBC have said that they take the code extremely seriously and have implemented training in respect of sections 5 and 6 of the code relevant to elections. Now, we have a great interest in openness and accountability within local government, as you all know, and indeed, Dennis and I will be discussing standards in the vlog this week. But an interesting first-tier tribunal judgment has been handed down in respect of information requested by the BBC. So this is the matter of Cooper and the Information Commissioner, whereby Cumberland Council refused to release documents relating to a decision to double councillor pay over an 11-month period. Broadly speaking, this relates to the use of a Section 36 exemption to withhold information. Now, for those of you that don't know, Section 36 states that in the reasonable opinion of a qualified person, disclosure of the information under this Act would or would be likely to inhibit the free and frank exchange of views for the purposes of deliberation, or would be likely otherwise to prejudice the effective conduct of public affairs. That test is also subject to the public interest test. On balance, does the public interest on maintaining the exemption outweigh the public interest in disclosing it? Here, the tribunal concluded that there should be public scrutiny over how such matters, for example, remuneration in the public sector, are calculated and formulated, especially when representations to the Independent Remuneration Panel, IRP, can be made by interested parties and voting on remuneration packages can occur within. The tribunal further held that, in what could be described as an exercise in lobbying for remuneration options in various forms, the withheld information related to pay and conditions for elected officials in public service. Positions in this sphere should and do expect a high level of scrutiny in relation to such matters. The public are entitled to be aware of and understand the process that undermines the remuneration and conditions which pertain or are proposed for change. A fair and proper assessment of such matters very clearly carries significant weight in the public interest, even if they are not approved. Indeed, the fact that they are or are not approved and the reasons for such decisions further inform the public with the necessary transparency and accountability that FOIA is engaged to provide. Now then, Dennis, let's talk about mayors and devolution.
Well, let's do, because during the party conference season, the Centre for Cities think tank had conversations with 7 of the Metro mayors: Andy Burnham, Kim McGuinness, Steve Rotherham, Tracy Brabin, Claire Ward, Richard Parker, and Oliver Coppard. And this was about their current and future plans for their area, the future of devolution, and their expectations of the new government. So here's some of the reflections based on the conversations that took place. Metro mayors are positive about the new Labour government, and there was a fair degree of consistency across the Metro mayors on this. They were all very positive about having a Labour government, and this perhaps is not entirely a surprise. They see immediate differences, however, with the last government on communications, now more positive and collegiate, and the frequency of interaction, now more often. They also had big expectations of the government in relation to addressing the challenges facing the country, helping them address the specific challenges and opportunities in their areas, and progressing the devolution agenda. All of the Metro mayors emphasised that their approach to the job is to put place before politics. And to illustrate this, they all described how they work with the leaders of the local authorities that make up their combined authority and across the political spectrum, and how many of them had worked with the previous Conservative government to deliver for their area. And they stressed the desire to get on and deliver. And they saw this as the defining mantra of being a Metro mayor. The new Metro mayors elected this May recognise that they face a dual challenge of showing they are having an impact whilst also setting up their new combined authority. None of the Metro mayors was concerned that the government's filling in the devolution map agenda would prove a distraction from deepening devolution with them. So what area do Metro mayors want more control over? Well, in relation to policy issues, again, there was a high degree of consensus on several areas. All of them regarded single settlements as an important intervention that would help them to better deliver their aims and objectives. And they wanted more control over what Homes England does in their area, over employment support programmes and funding, post-16 education and skills programmes and funding as well. They currently have control over some of the post-19 programmes, and they would like to have more control over the rail services that operate in their areas. And in each case, they made the same arguments that more control would enable them to better integrate these activities with activities already happening in their area. Nearly all of them were either already franchising the bus system in their area or were planning to, in part based on seeing the positive results in Greater Manchester. Next, the mayors looked at the question of spatial planning powers and feel that they may bring some political difficulties. But interestingly, there was less consensus amongst the metro mayors in relation to the taking on the spatial planning responsibilities and powers that the government is proposing to give them. Some were very firmly in favour of the government proposals, while others highlighted the potential political difficulties that such a move could bring, which could undermine the working relationships that currently exist between the combined authority and their constituent local authorities. The devolution white paper is scheduled for the autumn. It will be interesting to see the extent to which the ambitions that the metro mayors have will be realised or frustrated when we see the detail of the white paper, and how they respond if they feel that they are not being prioritised by government in the way that they feel they ought to be.
Let's wait and see, Dennis, and if anyone wants to know more about devolution, do access the Northern Region recent meeting on the Resource Hub to hear from Amardeep Gill from Trowers and Hamlins on that very subject. Now, finally from me, there is a new sexual harassment law coming into force on the 26th of October, which applies to all employers regardless of size. This is the new Worker Protection Act, which creates a duty on employers to take reasonable steps to prevent sexual harassment of their employees in the workplace. Writing in the Local Government Lawyer, Nicole Nature, an associate at Bevan Britton, has set out some steps an employer can undertake to comply with the new duty, which include 1. Reviewing and updating, or when necessary, creating policies which deal with harassment and sexual harassment in the workplace. 2. Delivering mandatory training for all staff regarding expectations surrounding standards of behaviour, what sexual harassment is, and processes for raising and dealing with a sexual harassment report. 3. Improving awareness of the new duty for managers. 4. Rooting out any sexist workplace culture and adopting a zero tolerance approach in relation to sexual harassment. 5. Ensuring that methods of raising sexual harassment reports are clear and readily accessible to all employees. 6. Ensuring that all sexual harassment reports are properly investigated and resolved. 7. Appointing and training workplace champions to act as key contacts for those wishing to raise issues of harassment in the workplace to enable them to discuss issues in confidence in the first instance. Failure to adhere to the new law will allow the Employment Tribunal to increase compensation for any awards for sexual harassment by up to 25% if the employer is found to have breached the new duty to prevent that harassment. And on that note, you can read more on the items discussed today and many, many more besides by going to Bulletin 38, available on the LLG website now. So it's goodbye from me.
And from me too. Bye now.
Goodbye.